what we're trying to show here at the CSI is, okay, you got 1,000 partners, so you have this long tail, but then you've got these partners that are at the top that are in sort of the head of the power curve. And we're going to list those and put it on the CSI report, but then we're going to show you who's the best of the very best. And that is CrossViews. And the data says that.
Welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast, hosted by Bernie Borges. This is the podcast for the modern marketer who wants to hear from their peers in the trenches and the occasional analyst or rockstar influencer sharing strategies and tactics about what's working in modern marketing. Be sure to listen to the end of each episode for Bernie's summary and takeaways so you can plan your next move in your own modern marketing journey.
Hey there, welcome to episode 240 of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. This is Bernie Borges, CMO of Vengreso, and your host. Hey, thanks for listening. And my guest on this episode is John Ryan, CMO of CrossViews. John, welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
Thank you, Bernie. I appreciate you asking me to be here today.
Absolutely, John. I've been looking forward to our conversation for a number of reasons. And actually, the first one I want to share with my listener, I want to kind of bring them in on a little secret. And that is, John, that you and I haven't been able to say this too often with previous guests, but you and I have actually worked together in the past. That was a few decades ago. And I was trying to remember, John, was the internet even a thing when we worked together?
It was not. It was in the future. But I just want to say that it's been wonderful to watch how your career has changed, and you've done different things, and you've done a lot of things to help a lot of people in understanding their marketing efforts and their sales efforts. And I couldn't be happier for you.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate that. And likewise, that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because if we fast forward to today, you are a modern marketing CMO. You are also a published author. You've written a book called Buyer Steps, a 21st century marketing approach based on the B2B buyer's point of view. It's a terrific book. And we are here to discuss the marketing impact through Customer Success Index that you have implemented at your company, CrossViews. So let's begin for my listener with an introduction to the company CrossViews so that we can give your story the right context. Who is CrossViews?
Well, thanks. CrossViews is a professional services organization. We deliver solutions for companies in the IT area, in the customer service area, and also in the human resources area. We provide solutions that help modernize and digitize the employee and the customer experience within these companies. And we use ServiceNow as a platform to do that. I think ServiceNow last year did $2.6 billion in revenue. It's a software platform in the enterprise services management space, and they're growing at 35% a year. It's all based on the cloud. It's replacing legacy systems that were there before, and it's an exciting place to be. We've implemented ServiceNow well over 1,000 times. ServiceNow recognized us last year with the highest customer satisfaction rating in North America or in the Americas, and we have offices in London, Toronto, and all over the United States.
Wow. Great background, great backdrop. Congratulations on that achievement, being recognized by ServiceNow. Clearly, key player in the industry, having the highest CSAT score. Is that the right way to frame it up, John?
That's it.
All right, fantastic. So your role as CMO. So as CMO in the company, give our listener a little insight into what your focus is.
Sure. I think the main focus that I have in the market is to get us positioned correctly in the ecosystem of ServiceNow, so people are able to understand relative to other players what value we bring to the marketplace. A big part of that, Bernie, is education. So if you go to our website, crossviews.com, you go to our resource center, you're going to see a ton of content that's meant to educate, not to sell, but to educate the buyer. We feel that buyers are really busy and under a lot of stress. And quite frankly, they don't do a lot of major purchases every year. They might do a few. They become projects, and those projects need to be successful. So we think the way to a buyer's heart or to a company's heart is to educate, to give them as much great information as we can, much like what you do here on this podcast, so that they're well informed and can make the right decisions. The other thing is for the last couple of years, I've managed the ServiceNow relationship for CrossViews. I'm getting some help on that now with a gentleman that we just hired that was at ServiceNow for 10 years. So I'm very excited about
Oh,
that.
wow.
And then the other thing is that I'm very focused on sales enablement. To be in marketing, that's great. I love marketing. It's great. I think communications and conversations are extremely important in a fast moving world. And so from a sales enablement standpoint, I take it very seriously that I have to help, or we have to help sales do a better job communicating on every sales call.
Fantastic. Couldn't agree more on all your points, especially I love what you said. The way to a buyer's heart is to educate them. And of course, you're doing that through content. So fantastic. Let's talk about the Customer Success Index. What was your vision behind that? Can you kind of tell the backstory on it?
Well, Bernie, I'd love to tell you there was a vision, but I think what was the catalyst behind the CSI was my CEO, Chris Howard, who is a fantastic CEO. I love working with Chris. And last year we were talking and he was lamenting the fact that it was difficult to distinguish ourselves because of the raw CSAT score that was given out, because there were so many partners that were claiming, hey, I got a 9.6 or I got a 9.5. And we were out there saying, yeah, we have that too, but how do we distinguish that? So I think in listening to him, I've always felt, Bernie, and I'm sure you feel the same way, that the best way to complain is to create a solution.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I said, okay, so that's an issue. Our CEO is not happy with this. How can I address that? So I spent time, I'm doing this a long time, as you said at the beginning of the podcast, and I also spent 2 years consulting at Gartner, not as an employee, but helping Gartner with their business. So I came to understand what their business does and a lot of the tools that they use. And of course, we've known about the Magic Quadrant for quite some time. So what I did was I thought, well, is there a way to educate on this? And what would be the other metric that we'd look at besides just the raw CSAT? And then it occurred to me from a market research standpoint, the more responses you have to a question, usually that means the more accurate the answers are in an aggregate. So let me give you an example. If you sit there and go, I got a 9.5, but the two people that responded and said 9.5 were your two brother-in-laws that owe you money, well, that's not very valuable. So what you're looking for is a bigger sample size in order to increase the validity of the research. So by sitting here saying, okay, what are the two axes of the quadrant that we would build? It would be the raw CSAT, and then it would be the sample size. So I thought, well, that makes sense to me. So when I went and looked at the numbers that are publicly available on ServiceNow's website that come from ServiceNow and come from the conversations that they have with customers, we were far and away the sample leader or the size leader over the last year. When we entered the year, when I created this last February, we were positioned in the top right quadrant. The only one that was threatening us was Accenture. And Accenture is much larger than we are. But it gave us a real edge in conversations to say, from a customer success index standpoint, not only in the quadrant are we in the top right, but over time, the equation that I created for the customer success index, we were able to show a superior stack ranking. We didn't start in that position at the beginning of the year. Accenture was ahead of us, but as the year went on, we ended up at the top of the heap.
And is that public domain? And can anybody see that? Or is that something you share with prospects and clients privately?
It's the latter.
Okay, I get it. You said earlier in kind of toward the beginning of the conversation, describing your role as CMO, that one of the things that you focus on is sales enablement. So I'd like to understand, John, how you use your CSI as marketing and how do you use it as sales enablement, or are the lines blurred between the two?
Right. So from a marketing standpoint, we haven't promoted this into the marketplace. I do educate ServiceNow channel management about the CSI scores every month because I update the scores every month because the numbers get updated every month. From a
So you update people internally or update customers?
I update internally here at CrossViews, and I update with the people that work in channel management at ServiceNow.
Okay.
So I don't put this on LinkedIn. I don't advertise about this. It's not something that's ready at that stage for the buyer.
Okay.
It's not an awareness thing. You're talking to someone who's further down into the funnel or the journey or however you want to say it. And what they're looking for is, I need to make a decision. Now that I'm ready to make a decision and look at you versus other competitors, how do you stack up?
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why it becomes a sales enablement issue, because when someone does bring up a competitor, we can bring out the CSI and say, this is another perspective that you're going to want to have as you walk this around internally in your own organization. let's say I'm going into a pharmaceutical company, then first of all, pharmaceutical companies really use a lot of market research. So if they had something like this and they're having to advocate for ServiceNow within their organization and decide which partner they're going to use, this gives them another tool to walk around with and educate other buyers in that organization.
And you're actually able to show them a matrix, right? These aren't just words. You're not just saying it. You're actually showing them a matrix that displays your customer service index relative to other choices that they have.
Yes, that's correct. And when we take the customer success index, one thing I really believe in, Bernie, is the pictorial superiority effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the brain absorbs information much faster if you can put it in a visual.
Mm-hmm.
So it is very visual. It's your eyes go right to the quadrants. You can see where everyone is plotted. And then to the right of that, I put the stack ranking if that's what you need to see. But both of those together say to the customer, no one is up and to the right more than CrossViews. And actually, most people are clustered with smaller samples, which means that you're going to have to work hard to believe what they're telling you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This is kind of a rhetorical question, John, but I want to ask anyway, because so much of what we do in marketing sometimes needs to be either sold internally or perhaps collaborated internally. And in your case, you said, the CEO stated the problem and you came up with a solution. So I'm going to surmise you didn't really have to do much selling, but I'm wondering, did you have to do any kind of internal collaboration and kind of organizing things to make it a reality?
Well, people were very receptive to it. The sales team loved it. What I did was I used Soapbox and Wistia to educate people. So I actually created videos and then spread those internally so people could, use my language if they wanted to explain what it was. And when I first pushed it out there, in the charts that I sent out, I put some notes in the charts. I've added insight at the end of the chart so that I'm trying to help you understand what the data is telling you. But I don't believe in overwhelming people. So what I believe in is that, clarity is the new black when it comes to communications. So I really try hard to keep it simple and straightforward. But I really didn't get that many questions. It was more of, this is great. I don't know why people haven't ever done this before. And I had a similar response when I showed it to ServiceNow.
Okay. Now, did you have to train salespeople on how to use it? And the reason I'm asking that question is because I'm wondering if there's a point at which it's too soon to use it, or maybe not appropriate to use it, or not the right timing, or not the right individual, or whatever the case may be. Again, back to the sales enablement aspect of it. Did you have to train salespeople on how to use your CSI?
Well, what I did was in that video and in the notes that I sent, I said, don't bring this up too early, because I don't believe in bringing up a competitor's name if the buyer isn't bringing it up. We're just going to assume they don't exist. I've actually seen national advertisements where people bring up their competitor, which is like spending money for your competitor. Mm-hmm. I've seen that done, and it's unbelievable to me that gets through. But anyway, this is more of a tool that's used within the buyer's journey, where the buyer is starting to move from, awareness and interest, and they're in between sort of interest and making a decision. And they might bring up, hey, we're talking to this other competitor, or we're talking to these other guys. They tell us that they're the best. And then our salesperson can bring this out and say, have you looked at this? And the buyer can say, well, I've never seen this. And the salesperson can say, well, this is publicly available information. You can go to the partner site. It's just, we pulled that information right off those public pages and we plotted it for you. And this is what it looks like. And Bernie, because you've done this stuff for a while, is that if you can bring more clarity and get past the words on a page or just numbers on a page, you've really done a favor for the buyer, because now they're able to use this as shorthand to educate people around them.
Yeah, and you remind me of something that actually is part of the research that comes out of CSO Insights, and that is that even though the buyer is starting, in many cases, the B2B buyer in general, this is a general B2B buyer stat, it's not industry specific, is starting conversations with salespeople later in their journey. The buyer also admits that they want insights, they want value from a salesperson. Mm-hmm. So I think what you're addressing there is that conversation, if and when that conversation happens, to your point, John, you're actually bringing clarity to their research process, to their decision-making process. So you're adding value. Are you getting that kind of feedback from your sales team?
Absolutely. I think, You mentioned my book that I wrote 7 years ago, and that is exactly what I was trying to say in Buyer Steps, is that the buyer, because of the internet and because of devices that they have and their ability to self-service, they're not relying on the salesperson to tell them about what they want and why they want it. They can get all that figured out already. It's all available to them. And many times the buyer knows more about what they're buying for their industry and for their company than the salesperson does. And I've been on the side of I have people trying to sell me stuff all day.
Right.
And I get emails from people that say, "Hey, John, don't you want more leads?" It's like, yeah, who doesn't want more leads? What a stupid question. But what you haven't told me is, do you know anything about my industry? Do you know anything about my company? Have you done any homework at all? Or are you just here to waste my time? And lots of times they just want to waste your time. So I think as a salesperson or as a company that is being represented by that salesperson, our job is to educate. We have to give that buyer more credit, and we have to have more empathy for that buyer. That buyer is crushed for time.
Mm-hmm.
That buyer is being pulled on by everyone, outside and inside. This is the way we should imagine it. They're being pulled on by everybody, and you're trying to get in there and tell them that you've got some magic potion that's going to change their life. People, when we go out, we have to honor that buyer by showing that we've done the homework and that we can bring insight and that we're more consultative and helpful. And we're not worried about a transaction that has to happen in 30 to 60 days. What we're really worried about is what we should be worried about is being an extension of that buyer's management team and helping them see things that they're too busy to see, and that we can bring them tools like this to say, we're not making this up. It's real information. Hopefully this will help you be an advocate for ServiceNow and make the right choice, within your organization.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thumbing through your book prior to jumping on this recording with you, and I noticed that, it was published back, I think, in 2011 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was thumbing through it, it felt like it was written last week, because everything that, I didn't read it cover to cover in the last 24 hours. Again, I was thumbing through the chapters and just kind of, hitting a few chapters just to kind of catch up on it. And everything was totally relevant. To your point, John, it's all about being helpful, being a resource to the buyer. So what I want to do is I want to ask you one last question before I segue to my summary. And that is, do you see anything evolving in your customer success index? Is there kind of a version 2 or just anything on the horizon as it relates to this?
Yeah. Well, I think, the way we display it, I guess, could change. The way we maybe show it digitally so that we can have it as gated content that maybe we could allow people access to go look for it without having to, have one of us sitting in the room. I think it serves its purpose. It has been effective. We have so many other things that we need to address. I think one of the biggest things that I would say to the audience is that if you can create something like this, don't just look at the buyer as the only person who benefits from it. There may be other people that could benefit from the information too.
So other stakeholders, other buying influences.
Exactly. So if in our case, like with ServiceNow, we also try to educate ServiceNow personnel on the CSI, and they appreciate it because they don't have time to build these kinds of, we thought of it and we did it. So no one else had done it. ServiceNow hadn't done it. And ServiceNow, although they're cutting down the partners that they used to have over 2,000, now they're down to 1,000. That's still 1,000 partners. And what we're trying to show here at the CSI is, okay, you got 1,000 partners, so you have this long tail, but then you've got these partners that are at the top, that are in sort of the head of the power curve. And we're going to list those and put it on the CSI report, but then we're going to show you who's the best of the very best. And that is CrossViews. And the data says that.
I love that. The best of the very best. All right. We'll be back with the rest of my conversation with John Ryan in just a moment. Hey, if you didn't attend our webinar on February 19th, I want to give you some inspiration to access the recording playback. Tim Reister, Chief Strategy Officer at Corporate Visions, and I reviewed the results of 2 studies that reveal the impact of personalization when one word is used. It's really fascinating insights because 98% of marketers admit that personalization is important in their messaging, but only 12% of marketers think they're doing it right. Now, you can watch the webinar recording and get the ebook, which is titled The Impact of You Phrasing on Customer Conversations. Now, the insights from these two studies that are documented in the ebook and covered in the webinar can be used by marketing in emails and landing pages and ABM campaigns. Also can be used by salespeople in customer conversations. Just one word can make a big difference. And this webinar and the ebook share the facts to back up this claim. Now, to get the webinar recording and the ebook, just go to vengreso.com/events, and you'll find this webinar that was delivered on February 19th, 2019, even if you're listening to this podcast long past this date. Again, you'll find it at vengreso.com/events. Well, John, we're at a point in the podcast episode where I am going to summarize the key things that we discussed, and then I'll ask you to add any commentary that you'd like to add. And then we'll ask you where people can connect with you online, and then we'll bring this podcast to a wrap. We began our conversation with an introduction to your company, CrossViews, your professional services company focused on solutions in IT and customer service, really modernizing employees and the customer experience using the ServiceNow platform. ServiceNow is really considered the leader in this space. They're replacing legacy systems, and your company, CrossViews, has achieved the highest CSAT score in North America with ServiceNow, and that is a fantastic achievement. As CMO there, you're focused on really helping the company position itself within the ServiceNow ecosystem to really help buyers and prospective buyers understand your value proposition in the marketplace. And you do that, John, by producing a lot of content that educates the buyer. I love what you said. The way to a buyer's heart is to educate them. And you also manage the ServiceNow relationship, although you said you've got somebody to help you with that. And then you also mentioned that you are also focused on sales enablement, which is fantastic. I think more and more marketing executives are taking on that additional responsibility of sales enablement. So thank you for being a leader in that. And we talked about your vision for the customer success index at CrossViews. And you said that really the catalyst was your CEO, Chris Howard. He said, hey, it's really hard for us to distinguish our CSAT scores because, they're similar to others. And so you said, well, let's find a solution for this. And you kind of tapped into your consulting experience for big brands like Gartner. And you came up with, some insights into how to display your customer success index by showing both the raw score, but also the sample size. And then using the sample size along with your stack ranking as a way to really call attention to the validity and the strength of your customer success index. You mentioned, John, that it's not really something that's out there in the public domain and that you do update people internally at CrossViews as well as the people that you work with at ServiceNow, but it's really a big sales enablement tool. It allows your salespeople to show it to prospects. You, of course, display it visually in a quadrant, and again, includes the stack ranking. You mentioned salespeople love it. I can understand why. You did a really nice video explanation. You kept it simple. You used insights or communicated the insights in the charts, and again, kept it, very simple and straightforward. And so you also coach the salespeople not to bring up the CSI too early. You really don't want to call too much attention to competition if you don't have to in the sales process, but it's really a tool that allows the buyer in their journey to understand your value proposition. So it's something that really, when a salesperson's talking to a prospect and they acknowledge that prospect acknowledges that they're looking at some of your competitors, that's when it really makes a whole lot of sense to bring clarity to that prospect and help them understand exactly how you stack rank and the validity, the validation of your customer success insight. And as you pointed out, John, the job of the salesperson, the modern salesperson, is to help the buyer, educate the buyer, bring insights, and really be a resource to them. And then we kind of closed the interview with what you're thinking about the next phase of the CSI. And it's really kind of making it available as gated content and not focus exclusively on the central buyer, but also make it available to anybody else that might need it, and really just continue to validate that you're really the best of the very best within the ServiceNow community, and then just continue to build on the success that you're having with your customer success index. No pun intended there. Anyway, John, that's my summary. Is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I thought that was outstanding, Bernie. I appreciate you letting me share my story here on your podcast. It was a great summation. Really looking forward to listening to more of your podcasts, and I hope your listeners got value out of this.
Well, I'm sure they did, John. Thank you so much. Before we let you go, where can people connect with you online to just connect with you and learn more about what you've got going on?
Well, I think if you go to LinkedIn and type in John Ryan CrossViews, you'll find me. I always like to listen to people smarter than myself, which is fortunately not hard to find, Bernie. So thank you to anyone who reaches out and wants to talk about marketing or strategy or anything else.
You're funny, John. Well, thank you so much, John, for sharing that again. We will link that up in our show notes. I think my listener knows that. And it's been a blast sharing your story, John. Continue to rock and roll with this and your continued success as CMO at CrossViews.
Thank you, sir.
This wraps up another inspiring episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. If you want to share this podcast with a friend, let them know that we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Podcasts. And we love 5-star reviews. If you are not subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast player so you don't miss an episode. You can read the show notes for each episode at Vengreso.com. While you're there, sign up to receive the show notes delivered to your inbox through our weekly alerts. And be sure to also check out our Selling with Social podcast hosted by Vengreso CEO Mario Martinez Jr. Again, you'll find our show notes at Vengreso.com. And that's 1 S in Vengreso. Tune in again next week when Bernie Borges brings you another inspiring interview to help you thrive on your modern marketing journey.